The morning air in the small Midwestern town carried the crisp bite of late autumn. Frost clung to the edges of the patrol car's windshield as Officer Daniel Hayes steered down Main Street, his K9 partner Rex, alert in the back seat. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet Daniel had grown used to after years on the force, but there was always that edge of unpredictability in his work. He'd learned never to confuse silence with safety. Daniel glanced at Rex through the rearview mirror. The German shepherd sat upright, ears pricked, amber eyes scanning the world outside the window. Rex had been with him for 5 years, trained not only for narcotics and tracking, but also for reading situations long before human senses could. More than once, Rex's instincts had saved Daniel from mistakes he still carried like scars. As they turned a corner near the outskirts of town, the silhouette of an old abandoned church came into view. Its white paint had peeled into grey patches, the steeple tilting slightly as if it had surrendered to time. Most people avoided the building, dismissing it as another relic from a town that had lost too many residents to bigger cities. But Rex stiffened, and Daniel felt the sudden tension shift in the car. Without warning, Rex whined and scratched at the window. Daniel slowed the cruiser, parking at the curb. "What is it, boy?" he muttered, already feeling his pulse quicken. Rex barked sharply, his gaze locked on the church. Daniel frowned. He'd passed this building dozens of times and never given it more than a glance, but Rex refused to look away. Instead, the dog pressed his nose against the glass, growling deep in his throat. Daniel stepped out of the car, the crunch of gravel loud beneath his boots. The November wind whipped against his jacket, carrying with it the smell of damp leaves and distant wood smoke. He walked slowly toward the church, Rex straining against his lead. The closer they got, the more restless Rex became, his claws scraping against the worn steps as if urging Daniel inside. He paused at the door, its wood swollen and cracked from years of weather. Something about the silence unsettled him. Churches, abandoned or not, usually held a kind of peaceful aura, but here the air felt heavy, as though the building itself was holding its breath. "Relax, Rex," Daniel said softly, though he felt no calm himself. He placed a hand on the dog's collar, steadying him. Before he could investigate further, his radio crackled, calling him back to routine patrol. With one last glance at the padlocked entrance, Daniel led Rex back to the cruiser. The dog resisted, looking over his shoulder until the church disappeared from view. Inside the car, Daniel tightened his grip on the steering wheel, uneasy. Years on the force had taught him not to dismiss Rex's instincts, and something about that old building gnawed at him. He told himself it was nothing, that maybe a raccoon or stray animal had taken shelter inside, but a voice deep down whispered otherwise. It was the same voice that had spoken to him years ago, the one he'd ignored during a call that ended in tragedy. A mistake that still haunted his sleep, a failure that had left him determined never to overlook warning signs again. And now here he was, faced with a building his partner refused to ignore. Before we continue this incredible story, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss stories like this one. As Daniel pulled back onto the road, Rex gave one last low growl, settling reluctantly into his seat. The abandoned church faded in the rearview mirror, but the unease remained, crawling under Daniel's skin. He knew this wasn't over. Something waited behind those broken windows and rotting wood, something that had caught Rex's attention for a reason. And deep down, Daniel sensed that this day was only the beginning of a path he could never turn away from. The following morning, Daniel parked his cruiser a block away from the abandoned church. The sky was overcast, the kind of dull grey that pressed down on everything beneath it, making the world feel smaller. Rex sat in the back seat, his body taut with anticipation, as if he already knew where they were headed. Daniel walked the cracked sidewalk slowly, his eyes scanning the exterior of the church. The building stood in silence, its boarded windows rattling faintly against the wind. Rust streaked down the once white siding, and weeds twisted up along the foundation. Yet, despite its decay, subtle signs told a different story. He noticed footprints in the dirt near the side door, too fresh to belong to random passers-by. The padlock on the door seemed newer than the rotting wood it hung on, its metal uncorroded. He crouched to examine it, brushing away bits of fallen paint. "Not the kind of lock you'd waste on a place that's supposed to be empty," Daniel murmured. Rex let out a low growl, pulling him closer to the entrance. Daniel tightened the leash, his eyes narrowing. Something wasn't right. Just then, his radio crackled. "Unit 12, status check," dispatch called. Daniel pressed the button on his shoulder mic. "Unit 12, all clear." "Just patrolling." He hesitated before releasing the button, his thumb lingering. He wanted to say more, to tell them that the dog had frozen in front of this church yesterday and was doing it again now, that something inside didn't add up. But procedure demanded evidence, not hunches, and certainly not the instincts of a dog, no matter how well trained. Still, he couldn't ignore it. He circled the building, Rex tugging insistently at his side. At the back, a basement window sat slightly ajar, though covered loosely by warped boards. He leaned closer, the faint smell of mildew drifting out. For a moment, he thought he heard something, a soft shuffle like movement deep inside, but it vanished with the gust of wind. Daniel pulled out his phone and called dispatch. "Can you run property records for the old St. Luke's Church on Pine Street?" There was a pause, followed by the operator's neutral voice. "Copy that, Officer Hayes. Records show the property's been abandoned since 2018. Ownership reverted to the county. No recent leases or activity filed." Daniel frowned. 5 years, huh?" "That's correct," the operator confirmed. He ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket. Abandoned for half a decade, yet someone cared enough to put a sturdy lock on the door and patch broken windows with makeshift boards. That didn't fit. Rex barked sharply, startling him. The sound bounced off the empty street, too loud in the heavy stillness. Daniel gave the leash a tug. "Quiet, Rex." But his own unease mirrored the dog's. Every instinct screamed that they weren't just circling an old ruin. Back at the station, Daniel tried to bring it up with Sergeant Wilkins, a veteran cop who measured everything by the book. "With all due respect, Hayes, a barking dog isn't probable cause," Wilkins said, leaning back in his chair. His voice carried the weariness of someone who had heard one too many far-fetched suspicions. "We can't go breaking into every rundown building because your partner doesn't like the smell." Daniel clenched his jaw. "It's not just barking. There are signs of activity, a new lock, fresh tracks. I even thought I heard something inside." Wilkins raised a hand. "You thought? That's not evidence. We've got real calls to answer. Don't waste resources chasing ghosts." Daniel left the office with Rex at his side, frustration tightening his chest. He hated feeling dismissed, but he knew Wilkins wasn't entirely wrong. Still, he couldn't shake the memory of Rex standing rigid at that church, growling at its doors as if guarding against something hidden inside. As he drove past the building once more on patrol, Rex pressed against the window, nose working furiously. The church loomed silently, but Daniel no longer saw just crumbling wood and broken glass. He saw a puzzle, and he couldn't walk away from it. Something inside that place was waiting to be uncovered. That evening, Daniel sat in his living room with the television flickering in the background, though he wasn't paying attention to the news. The warmth from the fireplace did little to thaw the weight that sat heavy on his chest. Rex lay at his feet, head resting on his paws, but his ears twitched every time a car passed outside, always alert. Daniel leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. He knew he should let it go. The sergeant had made himself clear. No warrant, no entry. By every measure of protocol, his hands were tied. And yet, the thought of that church wouldn't leave him. It pressed at the edges of his mind, the memory of Rex growling at the door replaying over and over. He poured himself a glass of water and stared into it as though the swirling reflection could give him answers. The problem wasn't just the building, it was his history. He remembered the case 5 years ago, the one that still woke him at night. A missing girl whose trail had led to an abandoned house. His gut had told him to search deeper, but he had second-guessed himself, waited for more evidence. By the time they got the warrant, the girl was gone. Her photo still sat in his desk drawer at the station, a silent reminder of the cost of hesitation. "Not this time," Daniel whispered to himself. Rex lifted his head as if he understood the vow. Later that night, when the streets emptied and the town settled into its usual quiet, Daniel pulled on his jacket and clipped Rex's leash. He didn't write it on the duty log. This was personal, off the books. The drive was short, though every streetlight he passed seemed to glare at him like an accusation. He parked 2 blocks away and walked the rest of the distance, his boots crunching against gravel, breath fogging in the cold air. Rex trotted beside him, silent but tense, his nose twitching as they neared the church. The building loomed darker than before, its outline jagged against the cloudy night sky. The wooden boards over the windows creaked in the wind, and the steeple cast a long shadow across the street. Daniel's flashlight beam cut a path across the worn steps as Rex tugged forward eagerly. Daniel crouched near the basement window he'd noticed earlier. The warped boards covering it were loose enough to shift with a little pressure. He pressed his ear close and held his breath. At first, he heard only the whistling wind. Then faintly, so faintly he almost doubted himself, he caught something else. A murmur, a sound that didn't belong to an empty building. It reminded him of whispers, soft and uneven, like the rustle of children trying not to be heard. His chest tightened. He pulled back quickly, scanning the shadows around him. The street was empty, but his pulse raced as if he'd been caught. He swallowed hard and steadied himself, pressing his back against the wall. "Easy, Rex," he whispered, though his own voice shook. For a long moment, he stood frozen, torn between action and restraint. If he broke in now, he'd risk suspension, maybe worse. But if he walked away and those sounds were what he thought they were, he would never forgive himself. He pulled out his phone, recording a short clip of the faint noises drifting from the vent. The sound barely registered, but it was there. Something, someone, was inside. Rex nudged his leg impatiently as if urging him to move faster. Daniel slipped the phone back into his pocket, his decision solidifying like steel. He wasn't going to ignore this, not again. Rules mattered, but there were times when doing the right thing didn't line up with procedure. As he walked back toward the car, the night seemed colder, sharper. He knew the path ahead would not be easy. The church was no longer just an oddity on his patrol route. It was now a question that demanded an answer, and Daniel Hayes had just decided he would find it. The next evening, the cold air stung Daniel's cheeks as he and Rex returned to the church. Clouds drifted low across the sky, swallowing the moon, leaving only his flashlight beam to cut through the dark. He hadn't told anyone he was coming back. Not his sergeant, not his colleagues, only Rex, whose eager strides pulled against the leash, as if he already knew what they were there to find. Daniel crouched near the side of the church, his heart hammering against his ribs. The boards over the basement vent rattled in the wind, and he pressed his ear close, straining to catch any sound. For a moment, there was nothing. Just the steady thud of his pulse and the distant rustle of leaves. Then, so faint he almost doubted it, came a soft murmur. He froze. It wasn't the groan of pipes or the shifting of old wood. It was a voice, high-pitched, uneven, like the sound of a child speaking in whispers. Rex stiffened, a low growl rumbling in his chest, his ears pricked toward the vent, his entire body tense. Daniel's throat tightened. He shifted slightly, trying to confirm what he'd heard. More sounds trickled through, muffled, overlapping, footsteps scraping, a cough, and then a quick shushing noise, as though someone inside had hushed another. Adrenaline surged through him. He pulled back abruptly, scanning the deserted street around him. Every instinct screamed that what he had just heard was real. But reality also reminded him of the obstacle he faced. Without a warrant, he couldn't break inside. He could lose his badge. Suspension, disciplinary hearings. It would all come crashing down if he acted recklessly. Still, the image of frightened voices trapped beneath the church burrowed into his mind. He couldn't shake it. He had evidence now, but it was barely enough to convince anyone else. His phone recording from the night before had captured almost nothing. And if he went back with only his word, he knew exactly how Wilkins would react. Daniel rubbed his face, frustrated. The law demanded patience, but his conscience demanded action. He pulled out his phone and hesitated before dialing a familiar number. When the line clicked, a woman's voice answered, warm but alert. "Hayes." "What's going on?" "Maria," he said quietly. "I need you to hear something." Officer Maria Lopez had been his closest ally on the force for years, sharp-minded, compassionate, and unafraid of bending rules for the right reasons. She had 2 children of her own, which made Daniel trust her judgment even more. He held the phone near the vent, waiting. For long seconds, there was only silence. Then, just as his arm began to ache from holding still, the faint sound came again. A childlike whimper, almost swallowed by the wind. On the other end of the line, Maria sucked in a sharp breath. "Daniel, what the hell is that?" "That's what I've been trying to tell you," he said, his voice low but urgent. "There are people in there. Kids. I can hear them." "Are you sure?" "As sure as I've ever been." There was a pause, heavy with the weight of her decision. Then Maria said, "Send me that recording. I'll take a listen myself." "I already did. But this is clearer. I need someone to believe me." "I do," she said firmly. "But listen, Hayes, if we go down this road, there's no turning back. You're talking about accusing someone of holding children in an abandoned building. The department will demand evidence, and if we're wrong—" "I'm not wrong," Daniel interrupted, his voice hardening. "I ignored a hunch once before, Maria. A little girl vanished because of it. I won't make the same mistake again." The silence stretched before Maria finally replied, her tone resolute. "All right. I'll back you up, but we need to be smart. Let's find a way to get proof they can't dismiss." Relief swept through Daniel, though the tension in his chest never eased completely. He glanced at Rex, who still stood rigid, staring at the church with unwavering focus. Whatever waited inside that basement wasn't going away, and now at least he wasn't facing it alone. The diner on Maple Avenue buzzed with its usual evening crowd, the clatter of dishes and low hum of conversation filling the warm air. Daniel slid into a booth near the back, Rex curled under the table at his feet. A few minutes later, Maria walked in, her dark hair pulled back in a neat braid, her badge tucked out of sight beneath her jacket. She spotted him immediately and made her way over, her expression already serious. "Couldn't exactly talk about this at the station," Daniel said as she sat down. Maria glanced at Rex, then back at him. "You look like you haven't slept." "I haven't," Daniel admitted. He pulled his phone from his pocket, opening the recording. "Listen again. Tell me I'm not losing my mind." She slipped on her earbuds, leaned in and pressed play. The faint sound of muffled voices seeped through, soft, fragile, unmistakably human. When the recording ended, Maria removed the buds slowly, her brows knit tight. "That doesn't sound like a stray cat," she said, her tone grim. "That's children. More than one." Daniel exhaled, tension easing just slightly. "I knew it." Maria tapped her fingers against the table, thinking, "We can't ignore this. But you know as well as I do, Wilkins isn't going to authorize a search without concrete evidence. We barge in, we're done. They'll bury us under protocol violations." "Which means we need another way in," Daniel replied, lowering his voice. "Child Protective Services. If there's even a chance kids are being held there, they have to take it seriously." Maria leaned back, studying him. "You're talking about going around the chain of command. That could end your career." Daniel met her eyes, steady. "If I'm right, and I walk away, I don't care about the badge. I couldn't live with myself." For a long moment, Maria said nothing. The waitress appeared, setting down 2 coffees before retreating. Steam curled upward, but neither of them touched their cups. Finally, Maria spoke. "You know why this scares me?" she asked softly. "Because I have 2 little girls at home. I keep thinking, if they were trapped somewhere alone, praying someone out there was listening, I'd want that officer to break every damn rule in the book to find them." Her voice wavered, but her eyes hardened with resolve. "All right, I'm in. Whatever it takes." Relief washed through Daniel, though it came tangled with the weight of what they were about to risk. He nodded, gripping her hand briefly across the table. "Thank you, Maria. We'll figure this out together." Rex stirred under the booth, letting out a low whine, almost as if he approved of their pact. Maria managed a small smile at the dog. "He knows we're in deeper than we realize." Daniel sipped his coffee finally, its bitterness grounding him. "Tomorrow I'll reach out to someone I trust at CPS." If we can get them on board, maybe we'll have leverage. Maria nodded but lowered her voice again. Until then, we keep quiet. No one else at the station hears about this. If word spreads, someone will shut us down before we even begin. Agreed. She checked her watch and sighed. I need to get home to the girls. Call me as soon as you have anything. As she stood, Daniel saw the weight in her posture. She was risking more than her career. She was risking the stability of her family, yet she was choosing to walk into the storm with him. After she left, Daniel lingered, staring out the diner's window at the emptying street. The neon sign buzzed faintly above the glass, casting red light across the sidewalk. He knew tonight marked a turning point. He wasn't just following Rex's instincts anymore. He had an ally, someone who believed him, someone willing to stand against the doubt and bureaucracy closing in. But the question still loomed. If they pushed forward, what exactly would they find inside that church? Dawn broke cold and pale, the first rays of sunlight filtering weakly through a veil of thin clouds. Daniel parked his car 2 blocks from the church, his breath visible in the chilly air as he clipped Rex's leash. Maria arrived a few minutes later, dressed in plain clothes, her expression set with determination. "You ready for this?" she asked, slipping her hands into her jacket pockets. "As ready as I'll ever be," Daniel replied. He glanced at Rex, who was already pulling toward the familiar silhouette of the church. He won't let it go. Neither can I. The streets were quiet at that hour, only the distant hum of a delivery truck breaking the silence. The church loomed ahead, weathered boards nailed over its windows like a warning to keep out. But to Daniel and Maria, those boards were an invitation to push forward. They circled the perimeter slowly, careful not to draw attention. Rex's nose worked furiously, his body stiff with focus. When they reached the back of the building, he began scratching and whining at the spot Daniel had found before, the small basement window half covered with warped boards. "There," Daniel said, pointing. Maria crouched beside him, running her hand over the loose wood. "Looks like someone tried to cover it up, but they didn't bother doing a good job." Daniel tugged at the boards until one shifted free, revealing a narrow opening just large enough for a child, but far too small for an adult. He shone his flashlight inside, catching a glimpse of concrete walls streaked with moisture. The faint smell of damp earth wafted out, mixing with something else, stale food maybe, or unwashed clothes. "God," Maria whispered, covering her mouth. "It smells lived in." Daniel clenched his jaw. "Yeah, it does." He tried to squeeze himself through the gap, shoulders pressing against the cold frame. But halfway in it became obvious it wasn't possible. He pushed back out, frustration etched across his face. "We're not getting through there," he muttered. Maria looked at Rex. "What about him?" Daniel shook his head. "He could fit, but I can't send him in blind. If there are locks, or worse." He stopped himself. The thought of Rex trapped in some dark basement twisted his stomach. Rex barked suddenly, the sound echoing against the empty lot. Maria pressed a hand to his collar, steadying him. "Shh, we can't draw attention." Daniel rubbed his forehead, pacing in a tight circle. Every fiber of him wanted to break that window, crawl inside, and tear down whatever barrier stood between him and the voices he knew were there. But without a clear plan, they risked losing everything. "Listen," Maria said gently. "This proves something, even if we can't get in. The smell, the boards, his reaction, it's all pointing to the same conclusion. We're not crazy." Daniel exhaled slowly, trying to temper his anger. I thought we'd find a way in today." She placed a hand on his arm. "Sometimes the first step is just knowing where to look. We have more now than we did yesterday." Rex pressed his head against Daniel's leg, a silent reminder that they weren't finished. The dog's body trembled with restrained energy, as if he was begging to break through the barrier that separated them from the truth. Daniel crouched to meet Rex's eyes. "We'll get there, boy, I promise." The sun climbed higher, washing the street in pale light. With people beginning to stir in the neighborhood, they had no choice but to retreat. Daniel replaced the board loosely over the window, making it appear untouched. As they walked away, the church stood behind them like a shadow, its secrets buried deep in the basement walls. Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his determination solidifying. The frustration of being unable to act only sharpened his resolve. They hadn't gotten inside, but now there was no doubt left in his mind. Something was hidden in that church, and he wasn't going to stop until he uncovered it. The station smelled of burnt coffee and old paper, the kind of stale scent that clung to every precinct Daniel had ever worked in. He sat at his desk, staring at the report he had just written. His words felt thin on the page: suspected activity, possible child voices, K9 alert. To him, it was more than enough to warrant action. But to the system, it would look like conjecture. He stood, squaring his shoulders, and walked down the hall toward the chief's office. Sergeant Wilkins intercepted him halfway, arms crossed, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "You're at it again, Hayes. Let me guess, the haunted church?" Daniel tightened his grip on the folder. "Not haunted, occupied, and I have reason to believe children are inside." Wilkins chuckled, though his eyes stayed cold. "Children, huh? All based on what your dog thinks? You're chasing shadows, and you're dragging Lopez into it too. Be careful, Hayes. People are starting to talk." Daniel stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think I'd risk my career, risk hers, on shadows? You weren't there. You didn't hear what we heard. You didn't smell that basement." Wilkins leaned in. "I've been doing this job 30 years. You want to survive in it? You stick to evidence, not hunches. Drop it." With that, he walked away, leaving Daniel standing rigid in the hallway, jaw clenched. He knocked once on the chief's door before stepping inside. Chief Harmon, a man with thinning hair and glasses perched low on his nose, looked up from a stack of files. "Hayes, you look like you've been carrying the world on your shoulders." "What is it?" Daniel placed the folder on the desk. "I believe the old church on Pine isn't as abandoned as it looks. My K9 partner alerted twice. I've heard noises inside, voices, children. There's a boarded basement window, signs of recent activity. I need authorization to investigate further." The chief thumbed through the report slowly, his silence stretching. Finally, he closed it with a sigh. "This is thin, Hayes. You don't have probable cause. If we storm into county property without a warrant and find nothing, do you know what happens? Lawsuits, media blowback, our credibility shot." "Sir, with respect," Daniel pressed, his voice taut, "if there are children in there and we ignore it—" "That's enough," Harmon cut in. "You're a good cop, Hayes. Don't ruin your record chasing ghosts." The words landed like a punch to the gut. Daniel stood in silence, every muscle in his body taut with frustration. He gathered the folder, turned on his heel, and walked out before anger could betray him further. Back at his desk, he dropped heavily into his chair. Around him, whispers circulated. He caught fragments. Church. Kids. Hayes losing it again. His reputation was unraveling in real time. Maria appeared at his side, her brow furrowed. "What happened?" "They shut it down," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "Said it's not enough." She pulled up a chair. "I told you they wouldn't make it easy. But we're not crazy, Daniel. We know what we heard, what we saw." Rex, resting near his desk, lifted his head. His amber eyes locked on Daniel's with unshakable intensity, as though urging him not to surrender. Daniel leaned forward, pressing his elbows against the desk. "Every time we pass that church, he stops. He won't move. It's like he knows something's trapped inside, and I can't ignore him." Maria's voice softened. "Then we don't ignore it. We just find another way. Let them laugh. Let them dismiss us. We're not giving up." Her conviction steadied him. The walls of bureaucracy had closed around him, suffocating and rigid. But within that cage, a flicker of determination burned brighter. Daniel knew then that walking away wasn't an option. No matter what the brass said, he and Rex weren't done with that church. Saturday morning came with a brittle chill, frost clinging stubbornly to the edges of rooftops. Daniel parked his car outside a modest brick house at the far end of town. A wooden cross stood planted in the yard, and a faded sign near the porch read, "Reverend Miller Retired." Pastor Miller had been a fixture of the community for decades, known for his calm wisdom and unshakable moral compass. Daniel hadn't spoken to him in years, But if anyone knew the history of the old church, it would be him. He knocked, and after a moment, the door opened. Miller appeared, older than Daniel remembered, his hair entirely white now, but his eyes still sharp. "Officer Hayes," the pastor greeted, voice gravelly but warm. "Been a long time. Come in." Daniel stepped inside, Rex padding at his heels. The living room smelled faintly of coffee and old books, shelves stacked with worn Bibles and journals. "I wish this was a social call," Daniel began, settling into a chair. "But I need to ask you about St. Luke's Church." At the mention, Miller's expression darkened. He sank into his own chair, fingers folding together. "That place hasn't seen worship in years." "Why dig up ghosts now?" "Because something's happening there," Daniel replied firmly. "Rex alerted. Twice. And I've heard voices, children's voices, coming from the basement." Miller's eyes widened slightly, though he masked it quickly. "Children? Are you certain?" Daniel nodded. "As certain as I've ever been." The pastor leaned back, sighing deeply. "I always suspected something was wrong after it closed. Officially it was money, declining membership, unpaid bills. But there were whispers. The county sold the building to a charity group out of state, supposed to be using it for community outreach. Then one night they packed up and disappeared. No announcement, no goodbye, just gone. Do you remember the group's name?" Miller frowned, searching his memory. "Something generic. Hope Outreach, maybe? Mercy Foundation? I can't recall exactly. But I do remember this. People said they saw vans coming and going at odd hours, boxes being unloaded, kids they didn't recognize wandering near the property. It never sat right with me." Daniel's pulse quickened. "And you never reported it?" "I had no proof," Miller said quietly. "Only rumors. And by the time I gathered the courage to speak, they were gone. The building was left to rot." He rose slowly and crossed to a cabinet, pulling out a yellowed folder. Inside were old papers, sketches of the church he had kept from his time there. He spread them across the coffee table. "Here, these are floor plans before renovations. The basement was always larger than people thought. Storage rooms, hidden staircases, even a sub-basement for supplies. If children are being kept there..." Daniel bent over the plans, tracing the lines with his finger. They'd have plenty of space to hide them. Miller nodded grimly. "But why? And why in our town? That's the question that keeps me awake." Daniel's throat tightened. He thought of missing person reports he'd skimmed over the past year, children vanishing from towns not far away. "I think I know why. And it's not good." The pastor studied him, eyes heavy with sorrow. "Then you can't stop. If God's put this burden on your heart, Hayes, it's for a reason. Those children need you to keep digging." Daniel folded the plans carefully and slid them into his jacket. "Thank you, Reverend. This gives me something concrete to work with." As he stood to leave, Miller rested a hand on his arm. "Be careful. Men who hide children in basements do not take kindly to the light of truth. You'll be fighting more than broken boards and padlocks." Outside, the air felt colder, sharper. Daniel glanced down at Rex, who walked with purpose beside him. The pastor's words echoed in his mind. The deeper he dug, the clearer it became. This was no coincidence. Something far bigger than a forgotten building was at play, and now he held the first real map leading straight into its shadows. The county office smelled faintly of ink and disinfectant, a sterile contrast to the unease swirling in Daniel's chest. He sat in the waiting area with Rex at his feet, the German shepherd shifting restlessly every few minutes. Maria leaned against the wall nearby, her arms crossed, watching the clock. A door opened and a woman in a grey blazer stepped out. Her presence carried the mix of warmth and weariness that came from years of dealing with crises most people never saw. She extended her hand. "Angela Price, Child Protective Services. You're the officers who asked for this meeting?" Daniel stood, shaking her hand firmly. "Thank you for seeing us on such short notice." They followed her into a modest office. Papers stacked neatly on one side of the desk, a framed photo of two teenagers on the other. Angela gestured for them to sit. "All right," she said, folding her hands. What's so urgent you couldn't go through official channels? Daniel pulled the floor plans Miller had given him from his jacket. We believe there are children being kept in the old St. Luke's church. My canine partner has alerted multiple times, and we've both heard voices, young voices, coming from the basement. The building's supposedly abandoned, but we found fresh signs of activity. Angela's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. You understand what you're saying? Alleging children are hidden in county property is serious. If you're wrong, this could backfire on all of us. Maria leaned forward. We know the risk, but we've seen enough to believe it's worth pursuing. If we're right, those kids don't have time for bureaucracy to catch up. Angela tapped a pen against her desk, weighing their words. Finally, she opened a drawer and pulled out a file. Do you remember the missing child reports from Lincoln, Jasper, and Polk counties last year? Daniel nodded slowly. I saw the bulletins. 10 children across 3 counties. Vanished without a trace. Angela pushed the file toward him. Still unsolved. The case is never connected officially, but I've always believed there was a pattern. Witnesses reported unfamiliar vans. No forced entries, no ransom notes, just disappearances. And now you're telling me about an abandoned church with possible activity. Maria's eyes widened. You think it could be linked? Angela exhaled, leaning back. I can't say for certain, but it's possible, and if it is, we're not dealing with squatters. We're not. We're dealing with organized people who know how to cover their tracks. The weight of her words settled like stone. Daniel felt the pressure tighten in his chest. This wasn't just a hunch anymore. It was a thread connecting to something larger. Angela closed the file, her expression hardening. All right, I'll help you, but we do this carefully. I can't authorize a raid without evidence, but I can assist in monitoring. Stakeouts, documentation, anything that strengthens a case. Daniel exchanged a glance with Maria. That's more than we had yesterday. Angela nodded once. Good. But I'll warn you, if you're right, these people won't go down quietly, and if you're wrong, you'll drag my department through a storm of lawsuits. You'd better be prepared for either outcome. Her voice carried the edge of someone who had fought too many uphill battles, but underneath it, Daniel heard something else. Resolve. He stood, slipping the floor plans back into his jacket. We're prepared. All I care about is the kids. Rex gave a sharp bark, startling them all slightly, as though echoing his words. Angela managed a small smile at the dog. Looks like he's on board too. As they left the office, Maria walked beside Daniel in silence until they reached the parking lot. Then she said quietly, We're not alone anymore. That changes everything. Daniel nodded, though his eyes drifted toward the horizon where the outline of the church loomed faint in his imagination. It does. But it also means the stakes just got higher. Rex pressed against his leg as if to remind him. Higher stakes didn't mean giving up, it meant pressing harder. The night was colder than expected, the kind of chill that sank into bones and made time drag heavier. Daniel sat in the driver's seat of an unmarked sedan parked across from the church. Maria was beside him, flipping absently through her phone but glancing up every few seconds. In the back, Angela scribbled notes into a small pad, her face illuminated faintly by the streetlight down the block. Rex sat alert between them all, head tilted toward the church, ears pricked forward. 3 hours, Maria muttered, checking her watch. And nothing. Daniel kept his eyes fixed on the dark outline of the building. Patience. If they're using this place, they'll show up eventually. They're not careless. They wait until it feels safe. Angela closed her notepad, resting it on her lap. I've done surveillance before, but something about this is different. That building doesn't look abandoned. It looks guarded. Like it's holding its breath. The words echoed Daniel's own thoughts. He didn't say anything, but he reached down to scratch Rex's neck. The dog gave a low whine, nose twitching as if he could already sense what none of them could see. The minutes bled into hours. The glow of the diner 2 blocks down faded as it closed for the night, leaving the street nearly deserted. The church stood silent, its boarded windows blank eyes against the sky. Just as the weight of exhaustion began to press down, Rex stiffened. His growl was low, rumbling, sharp enough to snap everyone to attention. Headlights flickered at the far end of the street. A van rolled slowly toward the church, its engine humming steadily. Daniel leaned forward, heart thudding, watching as it pulled up to the side entrance. "Finally," Maria whispered. They ducked low as two men got out. Their movements were brisk, purposeful. They slid the side door open and began unloading boxes, plain cardboard, taped shut. The sound of their footsteps echoed in the still night. One of the men glanced around before unlocking the side door with a key, disappearing inside with the first load. The other followed quickly after. Angela scribbled furiously, whispering, "Time stamp, 11:32, 2 adult males. Delivery into the church." Daniel reached for his camera, snapping photos through the windshield. He zoomed in, catching the license plate before it vanished behind the door. "Got it," he murmured. The van lingered for another few minutes before both men returned. They closed the doors with practiced efficiency and drove off, tail lights glowing red, until they turned a corner and disappeared. Silence settled back over the street, heavier than before. Maria exhaled slowly. So it's not empty. They're running something out of there. Angela flipped back through her notes, shaking her head. Boxes don't prove kids. It could be anything. Contraband, stolen goods, but paired with what you've already seen and heard. She trailed off, eyes dark. It adds up. Daniel clenched the camera tighter in his hands. This is what Wilkins and the chief wouldn't believe. Now we've got it. Movement. Evidence of entry. They can't ignore this. Maria leaned back in her seat, though her jaw stayed tight. You think they'll act on it? Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence spoke enough. Rex whined again, pressing his nose against the window, eyes locked on the church as if he knew the truth lay deeper inside those walls. Angela closed her notepad, voice firm. Whatever's happening in there, it isn't right. And if there are children, we don't have much time. Daniel finally tore his gaze from the building, meeting both women's eyes. Then we don't wait. We build the case until there's no choice but to act. Tonight was just the beginning. As the church loomed in the distance, its boarded windows seemed to watch them back, hiding secrets that refused to stay buried forever. The storm rolled in just past midnight, rain slashing sideways in sheets, thunder cracking overhead. For Daniel, it felt like the cover they had been waiting for. The church loomed darker than ever, its silhouette shrouded in the flickering flashes of lightning. The boarded windows rattled with every gust of wind. "This is it," Daniel said, tightening Rex's harness. His voice was steady, though his heart pounded like a drum inside his chest. "We're not getting a better chance." Maria adjusted the hood of her rain jacket, rain dripping down her determined face. "If anyone's inside, the storm will drown out our noise. But we need to be quick. No mistakes." Angela's hands trembled slightly as she held a flashlight, shielding it under her jacket to hide the beam. "I can't believe we're actually doing this," she muttered, her tone a mix of fear and conviction. "But if those kids are really there, they can't wait another night." Rex barked once, sharp and insistent, as if urging them forward. They moved to the back of the building where the basement window waited. Daniel pried the warped boards away, the nails squealing against the wood before giving way. The storm muffled the sound, masking their entry. He lowered himself, flashlight clenched in his teeth, trying once more to squeeze through. The frame scraped his shoulders painfully. Maria cursed under her breath. "It's too tight. You'll get stuck." Daniel backed out, chest heaving. "Then we make another way." They circled until they found a rusted service door near the foundation, half hidden by weeds. Daniel pulled at the handle, locked. He kicked it once, twice, before Maria crouched beside him, pulling a slim tool from her pocket. "You've been holding out on me," Daniel whispered. She smirked briefly despite the rain streaming down her face. "I spend enough years on the force, you learn a trick or two." The lock gave after a tense minute, snapping open with a dull click. The door creaked inward, the smell of mildew and damp concrete rushing out. Rex growled, low and deep, his muscles straining against the leash. Inside, the narrow staircase plunged into darkness. Water dripped from somewhere above, echoing against the walls. Every step creaked beneath their boots. their breaths sounding unnaturally loud in the stale air. The beam of Daniel's flashlight swept across the basement, broken furniture, shattered pews stacked haphazardly, boxes pushed against the walls. The smell was stronger here, pungent with mold and something sour that made Maria cover her nose. Then Rex pulled hard, nearly yanking the leash from Daniel's grip. He dragged them toward the far end of the basement, where a heavy steel door stood. Unlike the rest of the crumbling structure, this door was intact, newer, its edges reinforced. Daniel ran his hand over the cold metal. This doesn't belong in an abandoned church. From behind it, muffled but unmistakable, came the sound they had been chasing for days. A cry, faint but human. Angela's face went pale. "Oh my God, there's someone in there." Daniel's throat tightened. Not someone. More than one. They threw themselves at the door, testing its strength. The handle rattled but didn't turn. Maria kicked at it, the impact reverberating through the room. Daniel braced himself and slammed his shoulder against it again and again, until the hinges groaned. Finally, with one last shove, the lock gave. The door swung open, revealing only darkness at first. The smell hit them, sweat, fear, stale air, and then their flashlights caught movement. Small faces peered out from the shadows, eyes wide, hollow with exhaustion. Maria gasped. "Dear God, they're children." Daniel stood frozen for a moment, rainwater dripping from his jacket onto the floor. His chest ached as he realized the truth of everything Rex had been trying to tell him. 10 children, huddled together in the dim light, stared back at them from the darkness of the church basement. The beam of Daniel's flashlight quivered as he stepped into the basement room. The children shrank back at first, squinting against the sudden light, their thin arms wrapping tighter around one another. Their clothes were dirty, their faces pale, and their wide eyes carried the unmistakable look of fear mixed with fragile hope. Maria knelt, lowering her voice to a gentle tone. "It's okay. We're here to help you. You're safe now." A boy no older than 10 clutched the hand of a smaller girl, his jaw set in defiance even though his body trembled. "Who are you?" he demanded, voice raspy from thirst. Daniel lowered himself to one knee, setting the flashlight down so it cast a softer glow. "My name is Officer Hayes, this is Officer Lopez, and this is Angela. We're here to get you out of here." Rex stepped forward slowly, tail low, ears back. One of the younger children whimpered. But when the dog lowered his head and let out a soft whine, the fear shifted. A little boy with tangled blonde hair reached out hesitantly, touching Rex's fur. The German shepherd licked his hand, and suddenly the others moved closer, drawn to the comfort of something gentle. Angela's throat tightened as she scanned the group. 10, she whispered. "There are 10 of them." Daniel nodded grimly. He could see the signs of neglect, hollow cheeks, sunken eyes, clothes that hung too loose. "How long have you been here?" he asked softly. The boy who had spoken first shrugged, his voice cracking. "I don't know. A long time. They told us not to talk, not to make noise, said nobody would ever come." Maria's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed steady. "Well, they were wrong. We found you. And we're not leaving without you." A little girl, no more than 6, tugged at Daniel's sleeve. Her voice was a whisper. "Are you really the police?" Daniel looked into her wide eyes, and for a brief, piercing moment, he saw his own daughter's face, years younger, clutching his uniform before she and her mother moved away. The ache of that old wound pressed hard against his chest. "Yes," he said gently, forcing his voice not to break. "I'm really the police, and I promise we'll keep you safe." Rex nudged the girl's hand, and she gave a tiny laugh, fragile but real. It cut through the heavy air like sunlight breaking through clouds. Maria moved closer, inspecting for injuries. Some of them are dehydrated. "We need water, food, medical attention." Angela pulled a small water bottle from her bag and handed it carefully to the boy. He hesitated, then twisted the cap and shared it with the others, passing it around in careful sips. Watching them ration even the smallest drink nearly broke her. "We have to move them soon," Daniel said quietly, scanning the room. "We don't know when someone might come back." But for that brief moment as the children leaned against one another and Rex sat proudly among them, the fear in the room loosened its grip. "Officer," the boy asked again, his voice steadier now, "are you really going to take us home?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Yes, we'll take you somewhere safe. Somewhere with people who care about you." The boy studied him, then nodded once as though weighing the truth in his words and finding it strong enough to hold. Daniel looked to Maria and Angela, his voice low but firm. "We get them out, tonight." The storm outside raged on, thunder shaking the walls, but inside that basement something had shifted. Fear hadn't disappeared, but hope had sparked to life. Small, fragile, but burning all the same. And Daniel knew in his gut that nothing would stop him from carrying that flame out of the darkness. The storm had eased into a steady drizzle by the time Daniel and Maria began guiding the children toward the stairwell. Their footsteps echoed against the damp concrete, each sound magnified by the silence of the church above. Rex led the way, his body tense, ears swiveling at every creak of the old building. Angela whispered urgently, "We have to hurry. We don't know when they'll come back." Daniel nodded, ushering the children forward 2 at a time. His pulse hammered, but there was relief too. Relief that they were finally pulling the kids out of that basement. Then, as they reached the main floor, headlights cut across the broken windows. A vehicle rolled up outside. Maria froze. No, not now. The children huddled together, eyes wide with terror. Daniel signaled for silence, pressing a finger to his lips. Rex growled softly, his body a coil of energy ready to spring. The slam of car doors echoed. Voices, deep, unfamiliar, carried through the rain. Heavy footsteps approached the entrance. Angela's face went pale. "It's them." Daniel's mind raced. They were outnumbered, unprepared for a direct fight, and the kids were too fragile to move quickly. He crouched down, speaking in a low, steady tone to the boy who had taken on the role of protector. "Listen to me. Take the others and stay behind Maria. She'll guide you out. Do not stop, no matter what happens. Understand?" The boy nodded, swallowing hard. "But what about you?" Daniel gripped his shoulder. "I'll be right behind you." The front door groaned open, hinges shrieking. Flashlight beams cut across the dusty interior. 2 men stepped inside, broad-shouldered, their voices gruff. "I told you to keep the lights off," one muttered. "They were off," the other hissed back. "Something's wrong." Daniel motioned quickly. Maria ushered the children toward a side exit, her movements swift but careful. Angela stayed close, shielding the smallest ones. Rex growled louder now, lips curling, his gaze locked on the intruders. Daniel tightened his grip on the leash, then let it go. "Go, Rex!" The dog bolted forward, barking ferociously, his sudden charge breaking the men's composure. They stumbled back, one cursing as Rex lunged close, snapping at his pant leg. "What the hell?" one shouted. Daniel stepped from the shadows, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, his voice firm. "Police, stay where you are!" For a heartbeat the men froze. Then one reached toward his waistband. Daniel's chest tightened. No weapon visible, but the intent was clear. "Don't!" Daniel barked. Rex lunged again, driving them backward. The distraction gave Maria the chance she needed. She pushed open the side door, rain spilling in, and hurried the children into the night. Angela followed, her arms wrapped protectively around the smallest girl. One of the men cursed and raised his flashlight as if to strike Rex. Daniel surged forward, shoving him back. The impact sent them both stumbling against a pew. The second man shouted something, but the wail of sirens cut through the storm, growing louder by the second. Daniel's heart leapt. Angela had made the call earlier, and backup was finally on its way. The men exchanged a glance, panic flashing in their eyes. Without another word, they bolted back toward the door, shoving past the pews, disappearing into the storm. Daniel called Rex back, his chest heaving. The dog returned reluctantly, teeth bared, every muscle still quivering with adrenaline. Maria's voice rang out from the alley. "Daniel, we've got them out. They're safe." He jogged toward the exit, rain pelting his face as he burst into the night. The sight stopped him cold. The children clustered together under Angela's jacket, trembling but alive. Maria stood beside them, soaked to the bone but unshaken, her eyes blazing with determination. For a moment, Daniel let the scene wash over him. The storm, the sirens, the kids clinging to one another. Relief mixed with dread, because even though they'd escaped tonight, the men were still out there. And men like that didn't just vanish, but for now, the children were safe. And that was enough to keep him moving forward. The flashing lights of patrol cars painted the wet street in red and blue. Officers hurried about, securing the perimeter while paramedics checked over the children. The storm had weakened into a drizzle, but the ground was slick, puddles reflecting the chaos of the night. Daniel stood near one of the ambulances, rain dripping from his hair as he spoke with a paramedic. "They're malnourished but stable," the medic reported. "We'll get them warm, fed, and checked thoroughly at the hospital." Daniel nodded, his eyes drifting to the children huddled under blankets. They looked fragile yet resilient, survivors of something no child should endure. Maria knelt beside them, her own jacket wrapped around a shivering girl. She whispered reassurances, her voice soft but firm, a mother's voice lending strength. Angela stood nearby, phone pressed to her ear as she coordinated with Child Protective Services. Her free hand clenched tightly at her side, the weight of responsibility etched into every line of her face. Sergeant Wilkins approached, his expression unreadable. "Hayes," he said flatly, "you want to explain what in God's name you were doing here without authorization?" Daniel straightened, fatigue heavy in his bones but his resolve unshaken. Saving children. Something the system was too slow to do. Wilkins's eyes narrowed. "You went rogue, broke into county property. Do you have any idea the mess you've made?" Maria rose, stepping forward, her voice sharp. "A mess? 10 kids were locked in a basement. If Hayes hadn't trusted his instincts, if Rex hadn't led us here, they'd still be there. That's the only mess that matters." For a long moment, silence stretched between them, broken only by the hiss of rain on pavement and the distant chatter of radios. Finally, Chief Harmon himself walked over, his face grave. "I should be furious," Harmon admitted. "And believe me, there will be paperwork, investigations, maybe even hearings. But tonight—" He glanced toward the children, his voice catching slightly. "Tonight I can't ignore what you did. You were right, Hayes. And because of that, 10 lives were saved." Relief flooded Daniel, though it was tempered with the knowledge that the battle wasn't over. The men who had fled the church were still out there, and the network behind them remained in the shadows. Angela hung up her call, approaching the group. "CPS has secured emergency placements for the children. They'll be cared for, monitored, given everything they need." She looked at Daniel and Maria, her eyes softening. "What you two did tonight, it changes everything. We exposed them. They can't hide in the dark forever." Rex barked once, sharp and clear, drawing everyone's attention. The dog stood tall beside Daniel, rain dripping from his fur, his amber eyes steady. He seemed to understand the weight of the moment, his presence a living reminder that instinct had led them here when rules had failed. One of the older boys approached tentatively, clutching his blanket. He looked at Daniel, then at Rex. "Thank you," he whispered, voice thin but steady. "For finding us." Daniel crouched to meet his gaze, his throat tight. "You don't have to thank me. Just promise me one thing. Don't ever stop believing that there are people out there who will fight for you." The boy nodded slowly, then reached out to pat Rex's head. The German shepherd wagged his tail once, a small but powerful gesture of comfort. As the ambulances pulled away, carrying the children toward safety, Daniel felt the tension of the past days finally begin to ease. He knew challenges still lay ahead, the traffickers, the bureaucracy, the inevitable scrutiny of his actions. But for the first time in a long time, he felt peace in knowing he had chosen the harder path and saved lives because of it. Maria joined him, brushing wet hair from her face. "You realize we're both in trouble, right?" Daniel allowed a tired smile. "Yeah. But for once it feels like trouble worth facing." Rex leaned against his leg, steady and loyal. The night had been long, but dawn wasn't far away. Morning broke clear and golden, washing away the storm of the night before. The town stirred awake, but for Daniel, Maria, and Rex the world felt different, Lighter somehow, though shadows still lingered at the edges. 10 children were safe, their lives no longer confined to the dark basement of a forgotten church. And yet, the unanswered questions pressed in. Who had taken them there? And how many more were still out there? Daniel sat on the steps of the station, a steaming cup of coffee in his hands. Rex lay stretched at his feet, chin resting on his paws, his amber eyes half closed but still watchful. Maria joined him, carrying her own cup. She looked exhausted, hair tied back hastily, but there was a quiet pride in her expression. "Hospital says the kids are stable," she said, sipping carefully. "CPS is arranging placements. Angela's staying close to make sure it's handled right." Daniel nodded. "Good. They deserve better than what they've been through." For a moment they sat in silence, the only sound the distant hum of traffic. Then Maria spoke again, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if Rex hadn't stopped at that church?" Daniel's grip tightened on his cup. "Every minute. If I'd ignored him, if we'd walked away." He shook his head. "I couldn't live with that." Maria's eyes softened. "But you didn't walk away. You listened. You trusted him, and yourself. That made the difference." Daniel looked down at Rex, reaching to scratch behind his ears. "He's the real hero here. He knew before any of us did." Rex wagged his tail once, leaning into the touch, and Daniel smiled faintly. Later that afternoon, Chief Harmon called them into his office. Papers cluttered the desk, reports stacked high, but his focus was sharp. "You went against orders," he said, voice stern. "But you also uncovered something that would have gone unseen otherwise. Those children owe their freedom to your persistence." Daniel braced himself for punishment, but Harmon's tone shifted. "There will be an investigation, hearings, all the red tape you expect. But the community knows what you did. They're already calling you heroes. That kind of truth carries weight." Maria straightened. "Sir, with respect, this wasn't about recognition. It was about saving lives." Harmon nodded slowly. "And that's exactly why I'll fight to make sure you're not hung out to dry for it." Relief swept through them both, though Daniel knew the battle wasn't over. But it didn't matter. They had done what needed to be done. That evening, Daniel drove to the hospital with Maria and Rex. Through the glass of a pediatric ward, they saw the children sitting together, clean clothes replacing rags, trays of warm food in front of them. One of the younger girls spotted them in the hallway and waved shyly. The boy who had been the group's protector gave a small salute. Daniel felt his chest tighten, but this time it wasn't with grief. It was with something closer to hope. As they walked back to the parking lot, Maria glanced sideways at him. "So what now?" Daniel took a deep breath, the cool evening air filling his lungs. "Now we keep working. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning. If there's one church hiding 10 kids, there could be more places, more children waiting." Maria nodded firmly. "Then we don't stop." Rex barked once, sharp and resolute, as if sealing the promise. Daniel looked at his partner, his friend, his compass. "We'll keep listening to him. He hasn't been wrong yet." The sun dipped low, painting the horizon in gold and crimson. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of his past begin to lift. He hadn't saved everyone before, but this time he had chosen differently. He had acted, and lives had been changed because of it. Before we close this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one. And if you want to keep going, click on the suggested video now. It's one you won't want to miss.